As many of you probably know by now, last week BuzzFeed News published this article on the monitor behind me about the history of sexual harassment and in some cases abuse or borderline assault, or maybe even not borderline assault, just assault, committed over the years by Lawrence Krauss. If you haven't read the article and you're just hearing about this from me for the first time, I highly encourage you to pause this video, go read the BuzzFeed article. It is linked in the description of this video because this article, its contents, and the reaction to this article in the atheist skeptical community since its publication last week will be the subject of this video. So you'll probably have a bit more of an understanding of what I'm about to talk about, and you'll know more about what's going on if you've read the article. So if you haven't read the article, go ahead, stop right here, read it, and then come on back. Okay, I'm going to assume at this point that everybody has read the article who wants to read the article. There are a few things that this article is not. And I want to stress this because a lot of the reaction I'm seeing from people in the atheist community who are trying to dismiss this article as not important, as not relevant, who are trying to find reasons to still defend and admire Lawrence Krauss, are saying things like, well, it's just he said, she said. It's just allegations. And as Ed Brayton said in a really excellent blog article that he wrote in response to the BuzzFeed article, he says that it's not a he said, she said situation. It's a he said, a whole bunch of she's said, along with a bunch of witnesses to it in situations over the course of years and years. In other words, this article on BuzzFeed is thoroughly researched. It is finely sourced. There are multiple people who give their names, who are not just anonymous sources. They put their names to what they are saying happened. There are dates, there are places, there are official statements from universities and organizations that have conducted their own investigations throughout the years and found that Krauss violated their sexual harassment policies or was behaving in inappropriate ways. And they either banned him from their campus or they chose not to invite him to future events. In other words, it is extremely probable that Lawrence Krauss did this shit. And in addition to the various actions and patterns of behavior that are described from Krauss in this article, we also have Krauss's own statements over the years, which line up pretty well with the image of the man that is painted by this article. We have his recent public opposition, or maybe not opposition, maybe just lack of comfort, concern about the Me Too movement. He would retweet articles about people saying that the Me Too movement has gone too far. And by the way, that happened recently enough that when he retweeted those articles that were against the Me Too movement, when he sought to undermine the legitimacy of the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement and the wave of women in our culture over the last several months standing up and calling out sexual predators and sexual harassers, he knew that this BuzzFeed article was coming because this has been researched for months. And they talked to Krauss about this. And they quote Krauss and emails that he sent them responding to the various charges. And I'll get to that in a second. But he knew that this was coming. He knew that he was being investigated for the things he had done. And he chose to use his Twitter following, his celebrity, his platform to try and undermine the legitimacy of the Me Too movement because that motherfucker knew his day was coming. In his response to the allegations that were shared with him in preparation for this BuzzFeed article in an email segment that is quoted in the article, he says, well, none of these charges are true, of course, and the reason why these women are making these completely false charges against me is because I'm a celebrity. And just people do these kinds of things to celebrity. And it really demands no further explanation, he says. He says, it's just because I'm famous, and it demands no further explanation. Larry, you're not that fucking famous, buddy. Not only does he use his fame, his celebrity, as a shield, he uses his status as a scientist as a shield for his shitty behavior and for the shitty attitudes of his fellow scientists in some case, and the atheist movement, the secular movement, which has a very well documented problem with misogyny, with racism, with anti-Muslim bigotry. I've talked about all of these things. People far more eloquently and far more informed on the issues than I have talked about them as well. It's no secret that the atheist community is beset with all sorts of issues regarding sexual harassment, regarding attitudes toward women, regarding the silencing of minority groups, regarding very, very toxic, bigoted attitudes toward religious people, particularly Muslims. These problems exist, and I've talked about them, and lots of other people have talked about them. Of course, people at the level of Lawrence Krauss rarely say anything. In fact, Lawrence Krauss tried to use science itself to dismiss these concerns. As he is quoted in this article, he says, well, science itself counteracts misogyny and racism. It's built into the process, he says. So if you're ever about to question a scientist on his bias, on whether or not he might be showing some attitudes that are maybe racist or sexist or xenophobic or prejudiced against some group, no, you just stop right there, buddy. Science automatically corrects for that. Don't you say that about a scientist. Science automatically corrects for bias and bigotry and prejudice. Can you imagine the arrogance that it would take to say something like that with a straight face and to get people to believe it? And Lawrence Krauss says that. He's quoted saying that. As I believe it was Gretchen Koch said in a Facebook comment, I can't remember if it was a comment on something I had posted or something I saw her respond to someone else, but this issue was brought up, not directly in relation to Krauss, but a few months ago someone was saying something similar to that. Well, the scientific method screens out bias. And Gretchen, I believe it was Gretchen Koch, she said, the funny thing about that, I've never seen the scientific method carry out itself. In theory, science may be a process that screens out bias and prejudice. If conducted in the ideal way, it would certainly be true that that's how science works. It's certainly true that that's how science ought to work. But science is a human endeavor. Science is carried out by human beings, and it cannot help but contain our biases, our prejudices, our ignorance, the products of our personal viewpoints, of our personal privilege or lack thereof in various areas. Even though we try our best to screen it out and to limit the effects of those factors on the results of our experiments or our interpretations, even though we try very hard to make it as objective and as true as we possibly can, those things are always there. And to just blithely declare that science corrects for all of these things, oh, no, misogyny isn't a problem in science. We scientists have that taken care of. Science takes care of that itself. Fuck you. How dare you? How dare you use the scientific method as a screen, as a shield for your own shitty behavior and ignorant, prejudiced attitudes? The BuzzFeed article details some of Krauss's offenses and I think demonstrates convincingly that in all probability they happened and that he is guilty of these offenses. So I won't go into detail on specifics in this video. I leave it to you to read the article and to learn these stories for yourselves. I will say that my problem is not just with Krauss himself and with what Krauss did, but with the alarming number of people in the atheist secular community who went to bat for Krauss and continued to go to bat for Krauss and enabled him to continue to have a career while he was doing these things. And in many cases knowingly did so. Or at the very least have no excuse for not knowing. When they plead ignorance, it either makes them look like incredible fools, naive, incredible, blind fools, or it suggests that they were complicit, that they knew that this was happening and they knowingly chose to do nothing. There was an event scheduled to take place last week in Phoenix, Arizona that was to feature Sam Harris, who is also a piece of shit that I have no good for, but that's a completely different video, and Matt Dillahunty and Lawrence Krauss. And until Krauss either removed himself or was removed by the organizers of the event following the publication of this article, and I don't know which one that was, but by whatever means, for whatever reason, Krauss was removed from the event. Up until Krauss was removed, Matt Dillahunty was still eagerly promoting it, inviting people to come out, seemed to have no problem whatsoever sharing the stage with Lawrence Krauss. I find it impossible to believe that Matt Dillahunty did not know that when Matt Dillahunty read this BuzzFeed article, if indeed he has bothered to read it at this point, that he was learning about all of this for the first time. I find that impossible to believe. because I knew about a lot of this stuff. And if someone like me, a virtual nobody with a 58,000 subscriber YouTube channel, and not nearly as large of a presence or with as many connections in the community, knows about this and has known about it for a year specifically, I find it impossible to believe that Matt Dillahunty didn't know about it. And yet, he didn't say anything publicly about it before the event. He didn't pull out. He didn't demand that they disinvite Krauss. He said absolutely nothing. What is the interpretation of that where Matt Dillahunty comes out looking like a good guy here? But he just didn't know? I find that impossible to believe. I don't accept that. Seth Andrews had a response to it on his Facebook page. He posted a statement, and I invite you to go on Facebook, go to Seth Andrews' Facebook page, read his statement in response to this article and the allegations made against Lawrence Krauss, and you decide for yourself whether that statement is the statement of someone who is outraged by these offenses, who has great, powerful empathy for the women who were victimized by this man, who is dedicated to making sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen in the community again? Or is it the statement of someone who is covering his ass by expressing a token level of outrage at the allegations against Krauss, but is primarily interested in defending and cheerleading for the atheist movement and making sure that nobody uses this to make the atheist movement look bad? Because Seth does say, oh, the allegations against Krauss are very upsetting, and his explanation doesn't seem to be satisfactory, but, oh, why did BuzzFeed have to make the atheist movement look so bad? Why did they have to say all those nasty things about the atheist movement? Why did they have to say that the atheist movement is beset with all of this misogyny and tolerance for white supremacy and anti-Muslim sentiment? Why did BuzzFeed have to say that? As though those things aren't true, as though he doesn't know that those things are true. So it's not just Lawrence Krauss, I'm afraid. It's Lawrence Krauss and all the people who do things like Lawrence Krauss has done. And it's all the people around him who are enabling him, who are running interference for him, who are carrying water for him, who are doing whatever they can to use their platform, their celebrity, their influence to undermine the testimony of the women who are coming out and talking about what Lawrence Krauss has done to them or what they have seen Lawrence Krauss do to other people, to undermine them, to silence them, to discourage other people from coming forward, and to do their best to convince their audiences that there is nothing to see here, that at most it's just a few people misbehaving, that there aren't serious fundamental problems in this community that need to be addressed immediately. Stephanie Zvan has written about this problem both specifically and more generally many times in the past, and she is one of the true forces for good in this community. One of the reasons why I have not yet just completely thrown up my hands and given up on this cesspool of a movement and a community, because there are good people like Stephanie involved who are trying to make things better, who are trying to raise awareness about these issues, who are trying to do what they can to fix these problems and to hold people to account and to demand more of people, not just like Krauss, but people at upper levels of influence in the community, like podcasters like Seth Andrews and celebrities like Matt Dillahunty, who have chosen to look the other way and do nothing, who have acted like fence-sitting cowards in the face of this and in the face of things like MythCon last year. There are people like Stephanie who are trying to do the right thing and trying to make things better. And she gives me a little bit of the motivation that keeps me going, and many other people as well. But she has written about the priesthood, the atheist movement priesthood. And I think that is a very apt metaphor, that when you reach a certain level of influence, of celebrity, of admiration in the atheist movement, you are inducted into the priesthood. And from that point forward, it becomes a heresy to criticize you, or to call you out, or demand that you do better. What was the reaction among the atheist community at all levels at people who were sitting on the floor at conventions and people who were sitting on the stage. When the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal broke in its most recent form about 10 years ago, when people finally began paying attention to it, when the Catholic Church had its time's up moment, what was the response to that from most atheists? We were supportive of that, were we not? We believed victims. When people stepped forward, even when people came forward and they were talking about crimes that had been done to them 20, 30, 40 years ago, we were sympathetic. We believed them. We wanted their stories to be heard, and we wanted the people who had hurt them and had been protected by their institution to be brought to justice, to be held accountable for the harm that they had done. But what happens when one of our unofficial atheist priests is accused of similar crimes? What do we do then? Some of us do the right thing. Some of us react the same way that we reacted to the Catholic Church abuse scandal. Some of us believe victims. Some of us want to amplify their voices. Some of us demand that the institutions that protected their abusers be held accountable. Some of us do that, but a lot of us act like when one of our guys does it, well, we need to find every reason to defend him. We need to find every excuse in the book to continue to stay on his side, to salvage him somehow. And what do you think that says about us? We like to pat ourselves on the back about how skeptical we are and how unbiased we are. A lot of us actually believe the line of bullshit that Krauss said about, well, science is self-correcting, and science corrects and screens out the misogyny and the racism and the prejudice. A lot of us believe that fucking horse shit. A lot of us, because we have that high of an opinion of ourselves, because we've built this movement for ourselves that is built not on love of science, not on concern about the harm caused by religion, not on love of philosophy or truth, but on love of feeling superior to other people. That's why we love Lawrence Krauss, because, boy, he can go out there and he can make William Lane Craig look like a fool, can't he? He can give a hell of a speech about the origins of the universe and the beauty of science. So he couldn't possibly have done all of those things. And even if he did, well, I mean, it wasn't as bad as you're making it out to be. Or, it's he said, she said. If a Catholic priest is accused of the equivalent crimes, what a broken institution the Catholic Church is. How awful that these people have been allowed to get away with these things all these years. What a twisted criminal organization that would cover for these people, that would knowingly allow a person who was committing these acts to still have access to the public, to still be working in a position of authority over people. And they could use that authority and that influence to continue to commit crimes and abuse people. How sick and twisted and morally reprehensible is that when Catholics do it, or when Muslims do it? When atheists do it? Just a few bad apples. If it's even true, it might not even be true. Hey, we can't convict people. We can't convict people in the court of public opinion, can we? Unless they're a Catholic priest. And I'm not saying that the response to the Catholic priest sex scandal was wrong. I think it was handled pretty well, actually. I think we were right to be morally disgusted at it. I think we were right to stand on the side of victims and to demand accountability, both from the individuals who committed the acts and from the institutions that held them up and protected them. We were right to call for that. But why are any of us treating Lawrence Krauss any differently than that? Why are any of us treating Michael Shermer any differently than that? Why is the atheist community protecting its priests while we demanded that the criminal priests of a church be dragged out and forced to face justice? How can we possibly pretend to any level of moral superiority to those people when we are in the midst of a travesty like this? It should not be a courageous and heroic act to disown an inveterate sexual predator, whether that person is from your own community or not, whether that person is a close friend of yours or someone you don't know from Adam. It should not be a heroic act. It should not be the kind of thing that people do and expect applause for. It should not be the kind of thing that people even think to congratulate someone on or pat them on the back for. Good job. It should be expected. It should be bare minimum. You know, when I was a teenager, maybe a young adult, I bought The Science of Star Trek, which was Lawrence Krauss's first really big, like, mainstream book. I got that book and I read it and I thought it was great. I loved it. It was fascinating. I've admired Lawrence Krauss for a long time. I thought his speech about a universe from nothing that blew up on YouTube a few years ago, that went viral, that really pushed him to prominence in the atheist community, I thought that was terrific. I thought his debate against William Lane Craig in Australia several years ago, there were several of them, I believe. There were 2 or 3 of them. I thought they were terrific. I thought he did a great job. He can go to hell. It's disillusioning. It sucks. It hurts to know that someone you once admired turns out to be a scumbag, turns out to be a piece of shit. But that's the way it is, folks. That's what happened. That's who he is. The fact that he's a great science communicator, the fact that he wrote some great books and gave some great speeches and gave some entertaining performances and debates, that means nothing. He's a piece of shit. The first time I was invited on Seth Andrews' podcast was one of the most proud moments of my time as a public atheist. Boy, I told my wife about it. I was dancing for joy. I was going to be on The Thinking Atheist. And I was on it again. And I was interviewed in person on video. Oh, it was fantastic. Meeting Seth Andrews was awesome. He was a nice guy. He was a great guy. He seemed like he cared about social issues and feminism. Oh, he was a terrific guy, boy. If I had known then what I know now, if I had known what a craven, useless, self-serving coward he is, if I had known that back then, whew, if only. The same convention, the same conference where I met Seth in person for the first time was also where I met Matt Dillahunty in person for the first time. We had a nice little talk about Star Trek. He seemed like a really cool guy. If I'd known then what I know now. If I'd known how fucking useless he is. If I had known that condemning a sexual predator was not something he was capable or willing to do, I would have acted a little differently. I wouldn't have been so starstruck. You know, Wendy Marsman, who hosts a podcast and writes a wonderful blog, has charted a very similar course in this way to mine. She's written about how disillusioning it has been to not only find out about monsters like Krauss and Shermer, but to find out how many people that she admired in the community didn't really seem to think it was a problem. There's a double disappointment when things like this happen. There's the disappointment and the horror that you feel when you read the article or when you find out about it for the first time. When you find out about people like Krauss and what they've done, that's your first disappointment. And then your second disappointment is when you see how many other people you admired who are taking his side, or who are both sidesing it, or who are sowing doubt about the accusers, who are failing to stand up with the people who were victimized by this man. When you realize that the rot goes all the way to the top, and that there are people like the unofficial atheist priests that I've been talking about who are way more interested in preserving the reputation and the good name, as if there is such a fucking thing, of the atheist movement than they are about taking action against people like this. And how are they any different from the people who tried to contain and silence the allegations of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church because they were protecting the church? That's all these people are doing. That's all Seth Andrews and Matt Dillahunty and all the other people who are trying to shield Lawrence Krauss after this. That's all they're trying to do. They're atheists, yes, but they're just trying to protect their church. There are good people in this community. Despite the subject of this video, despite the tone, despite how negative it's been, there are people like Wendy Marsman and Stephanie Zvan and P.Z. Myers and Thomas Smith and Greta Christina and friends of mine who I am privileged enough to know personally and get to talk to a lot, like Christy Winters and Foxy Jezebel. And they're the reason that I'm still here. And people that I didn't name as well. There are a lot of people who are good people. Eli Bosnick is another one who has been very kind to me and has shown himself to be just a person who cares about doing good and doing the right thing. And they're the reason that I continue to try and exist in these circles. They're the reason why I have not just thrown up my hands and burned all my bridges to the atheist community and pissed on the ashes, because believe me, it's been tempting. After things like this, after things like MythCon, and after being reminded not only of the shitty people who commit these kinds of acts, but also the shitty people who enable them and make excuses for them and try to tell me and others that we're making too big of a deal out of it, it's real tempting to just say, fuck this. Fuck these people. Let them wallow in the cesspool that they have created. But it's the good people who are trying to make it better that keep me around. So I'm not telling you by making this video that you should leave. If you want to, I don't blame you. If you are a part of the atheist community and this is your last straw and you say, to hell with this, I'm out, I'm not going to try to stop you. I would not blame you one goddamn bit. Because this place is toxic. And the people at the top, not all of them, but a lot of them, too many of them, refuse to even acknowledge it. So I wouldn't blame you at all if you said, fuck this. I'm going to find something else to do. I'm going to find another fandom to be a part of. Because in many ways, that's all this is just a fucking fandom. But if you do decide to stick around, there are good people who deserve your support. And if you do decide to stick around, I would urge you to throw your support, not just monetary support, not just like Patreon donations and stuff like that, but your attention, your support to the good people, to the people who do not find it to be too much to ask to condemn someone like Lawrence Krauss, and to stand with his accusers, to stand with the people he has victimized. People who aren't willing to do that, or people who sit on the fence and say, yeah, what Krauss did was pretty bad, but these people over here who are complaining about it, they're pretty bad too. These outrage brigaders, they're pretty bad too. Anybody like that, they don't get my support. They get nothing but my contempt. I wouldn't piss on those people if they were on fire, and that's the fucking truth. I'm not here for them. They're the ones that are pushing me out. The ones I stay for are the ones I mentioned, like Stephanie Zvan and Christy Winters and Wendy Marsman and PZ Myers and Eli and Thomas and Callie Wright and Ari Stillman and Marissa McCool. There are so many wonderful people in this community who are outraged and appalled and hurt and disappointed by Krauss and by the reaction to Krauss from a lot of people that they used to admire too. They're the reason that I'm still here. They're the positive ones. They're the good ones. They're the ones that give me hope and inspiration. And they deserve my support. Anyone who can't even be bothered to unequivocally condemn an inveterate sexual predator like Lawrence Krauss can go fuck themselves. And it doesn't matter how good of a time we had talking about Star Trek. It doesn't matter how proud I was at the time to be on your podcast. It doesn't matter how awesome I thought your book about the science of Star Trek was. If you do things like this, or you defend and run interference and carry water for people who do things like this, then you can go to hell.